stared at the dead soil in his hands and felt nothing but emptiness. The dirt crumbled like ash between his fingers, gray and lifeless. Nothing would grow here anymore. Nothing had grown anywhere on Earth for 3 years. He stood in what used to be a rice field outside Seoul. Now it was just cracked earth stretching to the horizon. The sky above was the color of old bruises, purple and yellow and sick. The sun barely broke through the poisoned clouds anymore. "We have maybe 6 months," Park said beside him. She was looking at her tablet but knew she had already memorized the numbers. 6 months before the food runs out completely. Nodded slowly, 6 months. He had a daughter who was 8 years old. She would be 9 in 4 months if she lived that long. The thought sat in his chest like a stone. The Cascade Collapse, they called it. It started with the oceans turning acidic and dead. Then the crops failed worldwide. Then the radiation from the old power plants that nobody could maintain anymore. Humanity was dying, and there was nothing anyone could do to stop it. "We should head back," said quietly. "There's nothing here." They walked back to their vehicle in silence. The streets of Seoul were half empty now. Millions had died already. Millions more had fled to the underground shelters, but those would become tombs soon enough. That night sat with his daughter in their small apartment. The power was on for 2 hours each evening now, no more. They used it to heat water for tea and charge the emergency radio. "Papa, when will the plants come back?" asked. She was drawing pictures with old crayons, her favorite thing to do. "I don't know," sweetheart said. He had stopped lying to her months ago. She deserved the truth. "I drew a garden," she said, showing him the paper. It was full of flowers and trees and bright colors, things she had only seen in pictures. Hugged her tight and tried not to cry. 3 days later, everything changed. Captain was working the night shift at the Deep Space Monitoring Station when his screens went crazy. At first he thought it was a malfunction. The readings made no sense. Something enormous was approaching Earth, but it was not moving like any ship or asteroid he had ever seen. "Command, this is Station 7, spoke into his radio. "I have multiple contacts entering Earth's orbit. Repeat, multiple unknown contacts." "Station 7, confirm your readings. We show nothing on our systems." "They are here," whispered, staring at his screen, "right above us." The ships appeared over every major city on Earth at the same moment. They were massive, larger than anything humans had ever built, but they were not made of metal. They looked alive somehow, like enormous creatures floating in the sky. Their surfaces moved and rippled. Colors shifted across them like oil on water. They were beautiful and terrifying. Panic spread across the planet. The few remaining military forces scrambled jets, but the aircraft just circled uselessly. Nobody knew what to do. Then the ships opened, and beings emerged. They called themselves They were tall and thin, with skin that seemed to glow softly in shades of blue and green. They had 4 arms and large eyes that looked kind. They moved with a grace that seemed impossible, flowing rather than walking. Their leader appeared before the United Earth Council. The council met in an underground bunker, the last seat of human government. Stood before them, and when he spoke, his voice filled everyone's mind like warm water. "We have watched you struggle," said. "We have seen your world dying and your people suffering. We are and we are gardeners of life. For 10,000 years we have traveled the stars, helping worlds to grow and flourish. We offer you a second chance." The council members looked at each other in shock and disbelief. "Why?" asked the Secretary General. "Why would you help us? What do you want in return?" Tilted his head. "We want nothing except this. Remember our kindness. One day, far from now, someone else may need what you have to give. When that day comes, do not hesitate as we did not. Help them as we help you now. This is all we ask." They began their work immediately. Their bioships descended and released machines that were not really machines at all. They were living things, growing and changing. They spread across the earth like a gentle wave. Watched from Seoul as enormous structures blossomed in the dead fields. They looked like trees made of crystal and light. They breathed in the poison air and breathed out clean oxygen. Within days, the sky began to clear. Worked with the scientists, though calling them scientists felt wrong. They were artists, gardeners, healers. They gave humanity genetic templates, instructions written in the language of life itself. With these, humans could restore the extinct plants and animals, could heal the sick and dying. But the greatest gift was the seeds. They brought millions of these seeds. They were small and golden, warm to the touch. When planted in the toxic soil, they grew overnight into beautiful plants with silver leaves and bright blue flowers. And wherever they grew, the soil healed. The poison disappeared. Within weeks, other plants could grow there again. Planted seeds in the old rice field with. They worked together in the dirt that was already changing color, turning from gray to brown to rich black. Laughed as she dug holes and dropped in the golden seeds. "Look, Papa, they are warm," she said, holding a seed in her small hand. "They are alive," said, feeling hope for the first time in years. "They are going to save us." For 15 years they stayed. They worked alongside humans to heal the planet. Cities were rebuilt. Forests grew again. The oceans slowly cleared and filled with life. Children grew up knowing both the horror of the collapse and the miracle of the rescue. Spent hours in the genetic archives with, teaching him how to preserve and protect the gifts they had given. "Life is precious," they said. "Protect these seeds, these templates, this knowledge. Humanity will need them in the years to come." When Earth was finally healing, green and blue and beautiful again, they prepared to leave. Humans begged them to stay. They offered the aliens anything, everything, but refused gently. "We are gardeners," he said. "We plant and nurture, but we do not stay to watch the full harvest. That is for you to enjoy. Live well, young ones, grow strong, and remember your promise." The bioships rose into the sky on a warm summer morning. Half the population of Earth stood outside to watch them go. Many were crying. Held, now a young woman of 23, and watched with tears running down his face. The ships left behind a single beacon, a small device that pulsed with soft light. It transmitted coordinates into deep space, a way to find them if needed. On the beacon was carved a simple message in 100 languages: "Grow well, young ones." Kept working for 40 more years. He preserved every gift, every piece of knowledge they had given. Spread the seeds to every continent, teaching people how to heal the land. And every child on Earth learned the story of the day the gardeners came from the stars and saved them all. When was old and dying, sat beside his bed. "Did we keep the promise, Papa?" she asked. "Not yet," whispered, "but we will. When the time comes, we will." 200 years had passed since they left Earth. The planet was not just healed but thriving. Cities gleamed under clean skies. Forests covered the land. Oceans teemed with life. Humanity had survived and grown strong. But they had not forgotten. Admiral stood on the bridge of the Earth flagship Remembrance and looked at the stars. He was 51 years old and had spent his entire life in space. Humanity had spread to 12 colonies now, all built with the technology they learned from the. Every ship, every station carried gardens inside them. Humans had become gardeners too. "Sir, we have completed the scan of Sector 79, his officer reported. "No signs of activity." Nodded and made a mark on his star chart. Another empty sector. For 2 centuries, humanity had been searching for the beacon they left behind gave coordinates, but when human ships arrived, they found only empty worlds. Beautiful worlds, full of strange plants and peaceful animals, but no. "They were here once," Nam said, studying her scanner readings. She was the chief on the Remembrance and the great-granddaughter of Park, the woman who had spread the seeds. "Look at this plant structure. It is definitely cultivation, but it is old, maybe 50 years old." "Why did they leave?" asked. It was the question that haunted every human explorer. "I do not know," said softly, "but I think they were running from something." On Earth, every child learned the story of the in school. It was the most important lesson taught. The day of rescue was a holiday. People gathered in parks and planted gardens together, remembering. The cultural shift had been profound. Before the collapse, humanity fought over resources and borders. After the rescue, everything changed. The near death of the species had taught them what mattered. Now, humanity's greatest goal was simple: be ready to help when help was needed. They called it the debt unpaid. Not because they owed the specifically, but because they owed the universe the same kindness that had saved them. Every human colony had genetic archives, vast libraries of stored life. If a species went extinct somewhere, anywhere, humans could bring it back. They had saved 14 alien species from dying worlds in the last century alone. None were as dramatic as Earth's own rescue, but each one mattered. Captain commanded the research vessel Second Chance. It was a small ship, built for long-range exploration, was 33 and had volunteered for the deep space assignment because she wanted to find the. She wanted to thank them personally. Her crew was small, just 15 people, all volunteers. They spent months in empty space, jumping from system to system, following the faintest leads. "Captain, I have something," her communications officer said one day. "It is very faint, but I think it is a distress signal." Was at the console in seconds. "Let me hear it." The signal was old, crackling with interference. But underneath the static was a pattern, a rhythm. It repeated over and over, and it used encryption, the same codes they had taught humanity 200 years ago. His hands shook as she worked to decode it. The message was simple and terrible. "The garden withers, the cultivators fade. Any who remember, please help us." The timestamp showed the message had been broadcasting for 50 years. 50 years of calling out into empty space, hoping someone would hear. "Get me Admiral immediately," ordered, "and start calculating jump coordinates. We are going to those coordinates now." The signal came from the edge of the galaxy, a region humans had never explored. It would take weeks to reach, even with the fastest engines. Sent the message back to Earth and to every human colony. The response was immediate and overwhelming. Within days, ships began gathering. Not warships, though those came too. Mostly, they sent hospital ships, construction vessels, science ships. They brought genetic archives and medical supplies. They brought engineers and doctors and farmers. Admiral assembled the largest fleet humanity had ever created. Hundreds of ships, representing every colony, every nation that still existed on Earth. They called it the Relief Fleet. On the flagship, addressed his crew and broadcast to all the ships. 200 years ago we were dying," he said. "We were broken and hopeless. They came from across the stars and saved us. They asked for nothing except that we remember. Well, we remember. And now they need us. We will not fail them." The fleet jumped together, vanishing into deep space. The journey took 3 weeks. As they traveled, more ships joined them. Human vessels came from distant colonies, racing to help. By the time they reached the edge of the galaxy, the fleet numbered over 800 ships. What they found broke their hearts. The home system had 7 planets orbiting a dying red giant star. The star was old and sick, pulsing irregularly. Its light was dim and red, like an infected wound. But worse were the planets themselves. Scanned them from the remembrance and felt tears running down her face. The bioships that orbited the worlds were not moving. They floated dead in space, their surfaces gray and hard. They had turned to stone. "Admiral, I am reading life signs on the 3rd planet," an officer reported. "But very few, maybe 100,000 individuals." 100,000, felt sick. They had saved billions of humans. They had healed an entire world, and now only 100,000 of them remained. "Send a message," ordered. "Tell them we are here to help." The response came quickly. It was himself, the same who had spoken to the United Earth Council 2 centuries ago. His voice in their minds was weak, tired, but still kind. "You came," he said simply. "You remembered." "Of course we came," said. "Tell us what you need, tell us how to help." Explained, and with each word, the humans understood the tragedy more completely. 500 years ago, they had experimented with new forms of biotechnology. They wanted to create life that could survive anywhere, adapt to any condition. They succeeded too well. They created a microscopic organism that evolved beyond their control. It was a plague, but not one that killed quickly. It attacked only biology, the living technology that was the foundation of their civilization. Their ships died slowly. Their medical systems failed. Their food production stopped working. The strength had become their weakness. Everything they built was alive and connected. When the plague spread, it spread everywhere. They tried to fight it for centuries. They fled from world to world, hopping to outrun it. They seeded garden worlds as they went, leaving behind sanctuaries for other species. But the plague followed them always. "Why did you not call for help sooner?" asked through her tears. "We could not ask," said quietly. "We had given you so much already. How could we ask for more? We thought it would be too much of a burden." Was a young medical officer on one of the hospital ships. She was only 29 but had trained her whole life for this kind of work. When she heard words, she felt anger rise in her chest. "Too much of a burden," she transmitted directly to the leader. "You saved us without hesitation. You gave us everything and asked for nothing. And you think we would not help you. You think we would consider it a burden." There was silence for a long moment. "You gave us tomorrow when we had none," Admiral said. "Let us give you the same, please. Let us help." His voice cracked with emotion. "Yes," he whispered. "Yes, please help us." The human fleet moved into orbit around the worlds. Ships landed on the surface. Doctors and scientists swarmed out, ready to work. Was among the first to set foot on Ara Prime. What she saw would stay with her forever. The gardens were dying. The beautiful structures that had once covered the planet were crumbling, moved slowly among them, trying desperately to save what they could. They were thin and weak, their glow faded. But when they saw the humans arriving with medical equipment and supplies, many of them simply sat down and cried. "We are here," said to each one she met. "We are here, and we will not leave until you are safe." Commander Minyu Song had never seen anything so beautiful and so sad at the same time. He stood in what they called the Last Garden, a vast park at the heart of their capital city. It should have been full of life and color. Instead, it was dying. The trees were turning gray, their leaves falling. The flowers were wilting. The streams that wound through the garden had stopped flowing. Everything was covered in a thin layer of dust that looked like ash. Walked beside him, moving slowly. The ancient was thousands of years old, and he looked tired in a way that went deeper than just physical exhaustion. "This garden was planted when our world was young," said quietly. "It has lived for 50,000 years, and now it dies with us." Minyu knelt and touched the soil. It felt wrong, gritty, and dead. His scanners showed the plague organisms everywhere, billions of them, eating away at the living tissue that made up technology. "We will save it," Minyu said firmly. "We will save all of it." Looked at him with large, sad eyes. "You do not understand how deep this goes. The plague is in everything. Our buildings are alive, our ships are alive, our medical equipment, our food systems, everything. And all of it is dying. There is no cure. We have searched for 500 years. "Then we will search for 501, Minyu said. "You did not give up on us. We will not give up on you." Across the system, human teams were working frantically, had set up field hospitals in 3 cities. The who came were weak from malnutrition and sickness. Many were dying. The problem was that human medicine barely worked on biology. They were too different. Every treatment had to be invented from scratch. "We need to understand the plague first," told her team. "We cannot fight what we do not understand." Lee was an engineer who specialized in biological systems. He was 55 and had worked with living technology his whole career. He volunteered to study the plague directly. What he found was terrifying and fascinating. The plague organism was incredibly simple, just a few strands of genetic material. But it was perfectly designed to attack biotechnology. It could not survive in anything else. It would die in earth plants or human cells. It only lived in tissue. "It is like a key made for a very specific lock," explained to Minu. "And that lock is everywhere in civilization." "Can we change the lock?" Minu asked. "That is the problem. The lock is themselves. Their biology. We would have to change what they are at a fundamental level." Back on Earth, the news of this plight spread quickly. The response was immediate and overwhelming. People gathered in the streets and in parks. They held vigils for the dying aliens. Children made drawings and sent them across space. Every human felt the same thing. The people who saved us need us now. The governments of Earth and the colonies met in emergency session. The discussion was brief. "We are redirecting 40% of Earth's gross domestic product to the ARA initiative," the Secretary General announced. "Every colony will contribute what they can. This is our highest priority." 40%. It was an enormous sacrifice. It meant less food, less medicine, less everything for humans, but nobody objected. Not one voice raised in protest. On Mars Colony, schools organized fundraisers. Children grew extra food in their gardens to send to the relief fleet. "These are for the gardeners who saved Grandma," one little girl said, holding up tomatoes she had grown herself. Her grandmother had been alive during the collapse, had been saved by medicine. The ships kept coming. Every week more human vessels arrived at the ARA system. Engineers, doctors, scientists, farmers, teachers, anyone who could help. Nam worked 20-hour days studying biology. She had samples of their tissue, their plants, their technology. She was looking for something, anything that could help. "They evolved with their technology," she explained to her team. "They did not build machines and then use them. They grew them. They are part of the same biological system. Human technology is separate from us. Technology is them." "So we cannot just cure the plague," another scientist said. "We have to cure them and their entire civilization at the same time." "Exactly," said, "and that might actually be impossible." But humans had learned something from they had learned that impossible just meant difficult and time-consuming. Was 31 years old and had never worked on anything but theoretical biology before. She was brilliant but had spent her life in laboratories, not in the field. When the call went out for volunteers, she took the first ship to ARA. She was assigned to work with scientists who were still healthy enough to work. They were trying to understand their own plague, to find some weakness in it. "We have tried everything," one scientist told her. His name was impossible for humans to pronounce, so he asked to call him teacher. "We have engineered bacteria to eat the plague. We have created viruses to attack it. We have tried heat, cold, radiation. Nothing works. It adapts too quickly." Looked at the samples under her microscope. The plague organisms were elegant in their simplicity, beautiful, even, and deadly. "What if we do not attack the plague?" she said slowly. "What if we change the instead?" Teacher looked at her in confusion. "Change us how?" "Make you resistant, like a vaccine, but permanent. Change your biology at the genetic level so the plague cannot attach to your cells anymore." There was a long silence. "That would change what we are," teacher said quietly. "We would no longer be pure." "But you would be alive," said gently. "Alive and able to grow and change and continue. Is that not what being is really about, growing?" Teacher was quiet for a long time. Then he made a gesture that had learned meant agreement. "We will try," he said. The work was incredibly complex. They had to map the entire genome, understand every connection, every interaction. Then they had to find a way to change it that would not kill the patient. Months passed. The human fleet grew to over 2,000 ships. Entire prefabricated cities were built on worlds to house the workers. Humans lived alongside the dying aliens, working desperately to save them. Spent time with the humans, walking among them, watching them work. One day he found Shin, a cultural liaison who had been studying history. "Why do you sacrifice so much?" asked. "Your people go without so that we may have. Your young ones work until they collapse. Why?" Looked up from his work. He was tired with dark circles under his eyes, but he smiled. "You really have to ask," he said. "You saved us. Every human alive exists because of you. Our children, our futures, everything we have is because you helped us when we had nothing." "But we expected nothing in return," said. "I know," said. "That is exactly why we do this. You taught us that kindness is not a transaction. You do not help people because you want something back. You help because you can, because you should, because that is what good people do." Stood and walked to the window. Outside, hundreds of humans were working in the gardens, trying to save the dying plants. "You gave without expecting return," continued. "We give for the same reason, not because we owe you, though we do, but because this is who we choose to be. This is the lesson you taught us." Felt something he had not felt in centuries: hope. "You are truly remarkable," he said softly. "No," said, "we are just trying to be like you." In her laboratory, stared at her computer screen. She had been working for 18 months straight, taking short naps at her desk. Her team had tested thousands of genetic modifications. Most killed the test subjects. Some worked partially. None worked completely. But now, looking at the latest results, felt her heart race. "Teacher," she called out, "Teacher, come look at this." The old scientist came over. He looked at the screen and went very still. "Is that?" he started to ask. "Yes," whispered. "I think we found it. A retrovirus that modifies cells to be plague-resistant, and it does not kill the host." They looked at each other. Teacher's glow brightened for the first time in years. "We need to test it," he said. "I know," said, "and I know who should be first." She meant herself. She would take the first dose of the modified virus. If it worked, they would know. If it did not, well, she had accepted that risk months ago. But Teacher shook his head. "No," he said, "I will be first. This is my people's plague. Let me be the one to face the cure." Teacher took the injection himself, stood beside him in the medical bay, watching the monitors with her heart pounding. Around them, a dozen human and scientists waited in silence. The retrovirus would take hours to work its way through Teacher's system, hours to rewrite his genetic code cell by cell, hours to make him resistant to the plague that had been killing his people for 500 years. Or hours to kill him. They would not know which until it was over. "How do you feel?" asked every few minutes. "Strange," Teacher said. His glow was flickering. "I can feel something changing inside me. It does not hurt, but it feels different." 6 hours passed, then 12. Teacher's vital signs remained stable. The plague organisms in his body began to die. They could not attach to his cells anymore. The modified genetics rejected them completely. At hour 18, Teacher sat up. His glow was brighter than it had been in years. He looked at his hands and laughed, a sound like wind chimes. "It worked," he said in wonder. "I am free of it. For the first time in centuries, I am free." Felt tears running down her face. Around the room, people were crying and hugging each other. They had done it. They had found a cure. But one cure was not enough. They needed to treat 100,000 scattered across 7 planets, and they needed to do it quickly before more died. Minyu Song organized the largest medical operation in human history. Every hospital ship was mobilized. Every doctor and nurse worked around the clock. The retrovirus was manufactured in vast quantities, grown in special bioreactors that the helped design. Within weeks, they began treating the population. The aliens lined up outside the medical centers, weak and scared but hopeful. Many of them had never seen a human before. Now humans were saving their lives. Worked in a clinic in the capital city. She treated hundreds of every day. Each injection took only seconds, but she made sure to talk to every patient, to look them in the eyes, to let them know they mattered. "You are very kind," one old told her. "You did not have to come all this way to help us." "Yes, we did," said gently. "You would have done the same for us. You did do the same for us." But the retrovirus only solved part of the problem. The plague had infected everything in civilization. Their buildings, their ships, their technology. All of it was still dying, even if they themselves were now immune. That was where Lee came in. Had been studying the dead bioships in orbit. The ships were enormous, the size of cities. They had carried Lee across the galaxy for thousands of years. Now they were stone, lifeless husks. But had an idea. If they could be cured with genetic modification, maybe their technology could be from scratch. He brought his proposal too. The ancient listened carefully. "You want to clone our ships?" asked. "Grow new ones from preserved cells?" "Yes," said. "We have your genetic archives. You taught us how to preserve living tissue 200 years ago. We can use those techniques to bring your technology back to life." "It would take decades," said. "Maybe centuries." "Then we will work for decades," said simply. "We are not going anywhere." The project began immediately. Human engineers worked with cultivators to create new bioships. They started small, growing, tiny vessels the size of cars. When those worked, they moved to larger ships. It was slow, painstaking work. Every ship had to be grown carefully, nurtured like a plant. But gradually they succeeded. The first new bioship took flight 3 years after the cure was distributed. It was small and simple, but it flew, and it was immune to the plague. The who watched it launch cried with joy. Had a different project. She was an agricultural specialist, and she was working on the gardens. The seeds that they had given Earth 2 centuries ago could purify toxic soil. Wanted to create something similar but reversed, something that could actively fight the plague organisms in the environment. She called them inverted. They were plants that looked similar to the original, but their purpose was different. They did not purify soil. Instead, they released compounds that killed the plague organisms on contact. Planted the first inverted seeds in the last garden with watching. The ancient had returned to his favorite place many times, grieving for its slow death. The seeds grew overnight, just like their counterparts on Earth had done centuries ago. By morning, the garden was full of new plants with dark blue leaves and silver flowers, and where they grew, the plague died. Within days, the native plants began to recover. Green returned to the gray branches, flowers bloomed again, the streams started flowing. Stood in the garden and wept, stood beside him, not saying anything. Sometimes there were no words for joy this deep. But the greatest challenge was still ahead. They orbited a dying red giant star. The star was unstable, its fusion reactions failing. Within a century, it would collapse or explode, destroying everything in the system. Human stellar engineers had never attempted anything like this before. Stabilizing a dying star was theoretical at best, impossible at worst. But they had to try. They brought in specialists from across human space, physicists, engineers, mathematicians. They built enormous stations around the star, machines that could manipulate gravity and magnetic fields on a massive scale. The work took 12 years, 12 years of careful calculations and dangerous construction. Ships worked in the star's outer layers, in temperatures that could melt steel in seconds. 3 human workers died when a magnetic containment field failed. Their names were carved into a memorial on Ara Prime. When the system was finally activated, the entire population watched. The star pulsed, flickered, and then steadied. Its output became regular and stable. It would burn for another million years. Humanity had saved not just but their sun itself. 24 years after the first human ships arrived, the work was finally complete. The plague was eradicated from every planet in the system. The population was growing again, healthy and strong. Their bioships bloomed in orbit, alive and beautiful. Their gardens covered their worlds in green and blue. The last garden was renamed the Garden of Remembrance. In it, humans and planted trees together. Each tree represented someone who had died in the plague or in the rescue effort. Minyu Song stood in the garden with on the anniversary of humanity's arrival. 24 years, nearly a quarter of a century. You gave up so much to help us, said quietly. Your people went without, your children grew up with less. Some of your workers died here far from home. Why? Why did you sacrifice so much? Minyu thought about that. He thought about the stories his grandmother had told him, about the day the sky filled with alien ships, about the cascade collapse and the dying world, about the miracle of the seeds. When I was a child, Minyu said, my teacher asked our class a question. She said, imagine you are starving and someone gives you food and asks for nothing in return. Then years later you see them starving. What do? You feed them, said. Exactly, Minyu said. But it is more than that. You do not just give them the same amount they gave you. You give them everything you can, because they taught you something more valuable than food. They taught you what it means to be good. Was quiet for a long time. Around them, children played with human children. They chased each other through the gardens, laughing. It was a sound the garden had not heard in centuries. We chose to help Earth for a reason, finally said. We are old, my people. We have seen thousands of species. Most are kind when it costs them nothing. Few are kind when it costs them everything. We gave you a chance because we saw potential in humanity, potential for greatness. Did we live up to it? Minyu asked. Looked at him with eyes full of warmth. You exceeded our wildest hopes, he said. We gave you tomorrow, you gave us forever. And more than that, you showed the galaxy what is possible. Other species are watching, you know. They saw what you did here. They saw you sacrifice for beings that are not even your own kind. We are all the same kind, Minyu said. We are all alive, we all matter. Yes, said softly. You understand, that is the greatest lesson of all. In orbit above them, the first new bioship was preparing for its maiden voyage to the stars. It would carry both and human crews. Together, they would visit a nearby world where an alien species was struggling with an ecological crisis. The cycle of kindness was continuing, and it would never stop. Ambassador Park was 35 years old when she took the position as humanity's representative to the new human alliance. It was the most important diplomatic post in human history, and she felt the weight of it every day. She stood in the council chamber on Ara Prime, looking at the assembled representatives. Half were human, from Earth and the 12 colonies. Half were, their skin glowing softly in shades of blue and green. Together, they were creating something new. The Gardeners' Coalition is officially formed, announced. From this day forward, humans and will work together to help struggling civilizations across the galaxy. We will bring the gift that saved us both, hope. The council erupted in applause. Outside the chamber, crowds of both species celebrated together. It had been 4 years since the rescue was completed. 4 years of rebuilding trust and creating new bonds. But the galaxy had been watching. News of humanity's sacrifice had spread across 1,000 worlds. Other species, some humans had never met, sent messages of disbelief and wonder. Many could not understand why humans had given so much for aliens they barely knew. One species, sent a delegation to Earth. They were insect-like beings, logical and calculating. Their ambassador met with the human Secretary General in New York. "We must understand," the ambassador said through a translator. "You sacrificed 40% of your resources for 2 decades. You lost workers. You delayed your own expansion. For what? That could give you nothing in return." The Secretary General smiled. "That is exactly the point," she said. "They gave us everything 200 years ago and asked for nothing. We did the same because that is what the debt means. It is not about getting something back. It is about passing kindness forward." There was silence for a long time. "This is not logical," it finally said. Perhaps, the Secretary General agreed, but it is right. The concept spread. Other species began to adopt the idea of the debt unpaid. Not everyone, of course. Some species remained selfish and isolated, but many changed. They began to help their neighbors, to share resources, to save struggling worlds. They were the first to join the Gardeners' Coalition. They brought their advanced manufacturing technology. Then came a peaceful race of ocean dwellers who understood terraforming. Then the masters of energy production. Within a decade, the coalition included 15 species. Together, they had saved 9 civilizations from extinction and helped dozens more through crises. Sora Han was a young historian, only 23, but she had been given the task of documenting everything. She traveled between Earth and Ara, interviewing survivors, collecting stories, preserving memories. One day, she sat within the Garden of Remembrance. The ancient was over 10,000 years old now, but the cure had given him new life. He would live for many centuries more. "Tell me about the beginning," Sora asked. "Why did you choose to save Earth specifically? You had the resources to help many worlds. Why us?" Was quiet, looking at the trees that grew all around them. Human trees and trees, planted side by side, their branches intertwining. "We have a saying," he finally said. "The best gardener plants seeds not for the flowers they will see, but for the gardens that will grow after they are gone." "I do not understand," Sora said. "We chose Earth because we saw something special in humanity," explained. "Not your technology, which was primitive, not your strength, which was broken. We saw your capacity for growth, for change, for becoming something greater." He gestured at the garden around them. "We gave you a chance because we knew that if humanity survived, if you learned the right lessons, you would change the galaxy. And we were right." Sora wrote quickly, capturing every word. "It was a test then." "A test and a gift," said. "We were dying even then, though we did not know how far the plague had spread. We wanted to leave behind one last legacy. We chose you to be that legacy." "Did we pass your test?" Sora asked. His glow brightened. "You did not just pass it, you exceeded it in ways we never imagined. We hoped you would survive. We hoped you would grow strong. We never dreamed you would come for us. Never dreamed you would sacrifice so much. You taught us something, Sora Han. You taught us that the students can become greater than the teachers." On Earth, the old beacon left by the 200 years ago had become a monument. It stood in the center of Seoul, in a park where had once worked. Millions visited it every year. But now, beside it stood a new beacon. This one was built by both humans and together. It was larger, more powerful. It broadcast continuously to every corner of the galaxy. Its message was simple. Someone helped us when we needed it most. Now we help others. If you are struggling, if your world is dying, if your people are suffering, call us. We will come. This is the way. The message went out in 1,000 languages, and it was already being answered. Every month, new distress calls arrived. Species facing extinction, worlds dying, civilizations collapsing. And every time, ships went out from Earth and Ara and the other coalition worlds. They did not always succeed. Some civilizations could not be saved. Some refused help out of pride, but they tried. Always they tried. Park traveled to one of these rescue missions personally. A small world on the edge of the galaxy, home to a species called the Deneb. Their sun was dying faster than expected. They had maybe 10 years before their world froze. The coalition sent stellar engineers, the same ones who had saved the sun. They brought equipment and expertise. They worked for 3 years to stabilize the Deneb star. Watched as the Deneb gathered in their capital city, watching the sky as the engineers activated the stabilization field. The star pulsed, flickered, and steadied. It would burn for 1,000,000 more years. The Deneb fell to their knees, weeping. Their leader approached with tears streaming down its face. "Why?" it asked. "Why would you do this for us? We have nothing to give you. We barely knew you existed until you arrived." Smiled. 200 years ago, another species asked the same question when aliens arrived to save Earth. The answer is the same now as it was then. We help because we can, because we should, because someone once helped us and we promise to pass it forward. "We will never forget this," the Deneb leader said. "We know," said gently. "And one day when you are strong again, you will help someone else. That is how it works. That is the debt that is never paid because it is not meant to be. It is meant to be passed forward forever." Years passed. The Gardeners' Coalition grew to include over 50 species. They saved worlds, restored ecosystems, helped civilizations rebuild after disasters. The galaxy was changing, slowly but surely. On the 50th anniversary of the rescue, both species held a celebration in the Garden of Remembrance and stood together before a new monument, a sculpture showing a human and a planting a tree together. 50 years, said. Half a century of working together, of helping others, of spreading the garden across the stars. "It is not enough time," said with a smile. "We have barely started." Children played around them. Human children and children and children and Deneb children and dozens of other species. They chased each other through the gardens, laughing in their different ways. They did not see differences. They only saw friends. "When I am gone," said quietly, "this will continue, will it not? The cycle will not break." "Never," promised. Every child in the coalition learns the story. They learn about the collapse and the rescue, about the plague and the cure, about the debt that is never paid. They learn what it means to help others even when it costs everything. The lessons are part of who we are now. Nodded slowly. Then we succeeded, not just in surviving but in creating something that will outlive us all. That night sat in her quarters and wrote in her journal. She had been keeping it for years, recording the major moments of the alliance. "Today we celebrated 50 years, she wrote, "but it feels like we are just beginning. Every day more species join the coalition. Every day more worlds are saved. Every day the garden grows larger." Asked me if the cycle would continue after he is gone. I told him yes, and I meant it. This is not about any one person or any one species. This is about something bigger. It is about proving that civilizations can be kind, that strength can be used to help instead of hurt, that the measure of greatness is not in what you conquer but in what you save. They gave humanity a gift 200 years ago, not just the seeds or the medical knowledge, but something more valuable. They gave us an example to follow. They showed us what was possible when you put kindness first. We repaid them by saving their civilization, but more importantly, we repaid them by becoming the kind of people they hoped we could be. We became gardeners too, and now the whole galaxy is blooming. Decades later, long after had retired, a young human pilot named flew one of the new hybrid bioships to a distant world. The ship was beautiful, grown from both and human techniques. It was alive and aware, humming softly as it traveled through space. Was answering a distress call from a species humanity had never met. He did not know what he would find when he arrived. He did not know if he could help, but he was going anyway because that was what you did. As his ship jumped through space, looked at the living walls around him. They pulsed gently with light, a soft blue-green glow that reminded him of the He thought about his great-great-grandmother who had lived through the collapse. She had told him stories when he was small, about the day the sky filled with alien ships and saved everyone. She made him promise to never forget. He had not forgotten, none of them had. The ship hummed and felt its awareness touch his mind gently. The bioships could communicate in ways regular ships could not. This one was curious about where they were going. "We are going to help someone," told it. "Just like someone helped us once, just like we helped the. It is what we do now, it is who we are." The ship hummed in agreement, and together they jumped toward the unknown. Behind them, across hundreds of worlds, the gardens grew, and they would keep growing forever.